Evening, everybody, and welcome to our fourth Midreshet Wollishofen event this year. It is our very big pleasure to welcoming Rabbi Joseph Dweck as our guest for tonight's shiur, and I would like to briefly give you some background on him prior to his shiur. Rabbi Dweck was born in Los Angeles to a family of Syrian origin. Following that, he went to Brooklyn, New York for studies, both religious and secular, as well as various positions he held in New York as community rabbi and headmaster. Following or during his stay in New York, he also got his smicha at the Sephardic Rabbinical College of Brooklyn, from Rav Ovadia Yosef, Zichrono Livracha, which Rav Ovadia Yosef, who is also his wife's grandfather. Since 2014 and to this day, Rabbi Dweck acts as the senior rabbi of the Spanish and Portuguese Sephardi community of the United Kingdom. And the magazine Jewish News listed Rabbi Dweck in the top 10 of its series 40 under 40 in 2015. And I would like to quote from said ranking: "With Jewish unity in mind, Rabbi Dweck has made key overtures to the United Synagogue and other mainstream communal organizations in the last 2 years. He impressed thousands with his oratorial abilities at the Zero Tolerance to Anti-Semitism rally last summer." End of quote. Personally, I had the chance to getting impressed by Rabbi Dweck's ideas during a shiur at last year's virtual Limud Festival, where Rabbi Dweck explored whether existentialism is a Jewish idea. So without further ado, I would like to hand over the virtual microphone to Rabbi Dweck for his shiur with the title Understanding Tisha B'Av, Why Chinam, Valuelessness, is so central to the darkest day in the Jewish calendar. Rabbi Dweck, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It is a tremendous honor and a pleasure to be able to share with all of you tonight with the Midreshet. I'm very grateful to the committee and to the Kahal, I think all of whom I've never really met before. So it's good to be virtually in Zurich. Good to be able to share with you tonight. I'm very grateful that you've taken of your time to be able to share with me some thoughts of Torah as we come forward to facing in the next 3 weeks Tisha B'Av. I would like to say that, just to be able to be clear on our social contract, I'll speak for about an hour and open for questions from everyone on the ideas. Tisha B'Av, it is. What I'd like to do to open is to speak a little bit about the background, because in my experience, and you'll forgive me if I assume wrongly, but my experience is that Tisha B'Av is perceived by the greater Jewish communities of the world as a Bet HaMikdash thing, which means that essentially it's a day that we are commemorating the destruction of not one, but two Batei Mikdash, of two holy temples. And while that's not incorrect, it is incorrect to consider the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash as the source of Tisha B'Av. Rather, I will suggest that the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash both were symptoms of an earlier problem that really is the source of Tisha B'Av. Now, when I say this, of course, I'm saying it in terms of our collective tradition, how the Jewish people, how our chachamim, how our rabbis, our sages instituted our national relationship to this day. So there are a few things that I want to bring out into the forefront before we delve into this question of chinam, right, which is an interesting Hebrew word. So I've translated it as valuelessness. I also think it's important to recognize it in terms of lack of context, but I will open up all of those ideas as we go along. And so what it's important for us to do before we get into those ideas is to get down our foundations, and so we can build appropriately upon our foundations. The first foundation that is important, I believe, for us to recognize is the source, again, in our tradition, in our conceptual, perceptual framework of recognizing this day, right? So I say that because this isn't just something that is historical in the sense of you go to this date and you see these events occur. Very much of Tisha B'Av is recognized by our sages, the sages of the Talmud, of the Gemara, the sages of the Mishnah earlier, as a day to which we will relate as a nation, conceive of, perceive of as a nation in a very specific way, and they connect this date back traditionally to a much more ancient occurrence. What is that ancient occurrence that I'm speaking of? So I'm going to bring out for you, it's rare that I ever speak without quoting him. Yeah, he's my great guide. I'm going to read something together with you from the Rambam, from Maimonides. And he simply says the following. I'm going to share the screen with you so we can see it in the text. It's very important to see these things in text as much as we can. I'm also, now that I remember I've put it up, what I'm going to do is I'll put the link for this as well in the chat. So I'll do this 1 second so that you could either look at it on the screen or you can pull it up, and you'll also have it for yourselves later. There, I put it in the chat, and you can access the source sheet for tonight's talk. So this is from the Mishneh Torah, from Harambam's magnum opus, his great halachic work, in which he codified all of the halachic decisions of the Talmud into basic text. And here he's talking about fasts. And he says about Tisha B'Av the following. He says, Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, Hamisha Devarim Erubo. There are 5 things that occurred across history on the 9th of Av. And this is the first one. The first one is Nigzar al Yisrael b'midbar shelo yikansu la'aretz. It was decreed upon Israel, the Israelites in the desert, that they should not enter the land. What happened? What happened? Right? So we know that they were on the threshold, that, it's not a very long journey from Egypt to Canaan, to Canaan, to the land that is now Eretz Yisrael. And they reached the threshold of that land after spending a year at Mount Sinai. They had a pit stop, right? They stayed at the foot of Mount Sinai for 1 year. Some people don't realize that the entire book of Leviticus, the entire book of Vayikra occurs in 1 day, the whole book. And that occurs at the foot of Mount Sinai. So they spend a year at Mount Sinai. After a year, it's time for them to travel again. Parashat Bahalotecha in the book of Bamidbar is where they really end up getting off and moving forward. And then the next parasha, Shalach Lecha, where God says to Moses, send spies into the land, 12 of them, 1 from each tribe. Let them go and see. And so Moses does exactly what it is that God says. He sends these spies into the land. He gives them a remit, right? They're sent in for a reconnaissance mission so that they should be able to see what the land is like before they get in. And he tells them and come back with a report. I want to know how it is. They come back with the report, and the report is terrible, right? They say, look, the reality is it's a good land. There's some great produce. You have some great fruit, wonderful topography. There's honey and milk and all of that lovely stuff. There's just one problem. The people who live in the land are so massive and powerful that there's no chance whatsoever that we're going to be able to get in. So it's all a no-go. The whole plan is shot. It's over. It's done with. There's no reason. There's no way for us to be able to go into this land. This is a phenomenal breakdown, right? Realize, yes, that the entire endeavor of getting, at least in the way that the Torah puts it, right? The entire endeavor of getting Israel into Egypt in the first place is only to take them back into that land. Yeah, they need to be able to know slavery in order to know freedom, because as the rabbis say, and it's completely evident to all of us, En ha'or nikar ela mitoch ha'choshech. One only knows what light is when they know what dark is. Otherwise, it just is what it is. But it's not light as opposed to dark. And one only knows freedom when one knows slavery. And so all of it is meant only for them to be able to come into the land. Moses is only hired by God in order to be able to get them out of Egypt and bring them into the land. And here they are on the threshold of the land, coming out and saying, let's go back to Egypt. It's all a no-go. It's a disaster. The plan is a failure. All off. God doesn't like this very much. He's quite upset about it, as a matter of fact, and he's ready to wipe out all of the people. Moses calms God down, right? He asks him to relax, not to go that far. And God says, look, Moses, I will listen to you, but I am not a pushover. Hi Ani, it says in the Pasuk, I am a living God. I don't just adjust to whatever it is that the people want or think. The people that came back from that land, Yom Lashana, he says, 1 year for every day they will spend wandering in this desert because they clearly are not ready to go in. They have not released themselves of the slavery that they came from. And they said, Moses, I heard it, says God. They said that if they were to go into that land, their children would be treated like nothing. They would be completely belittled and scorned. Tell them, Moses, the children that they were so afraid of, being thrown away or destroyed, those children are the ones that are going to inherit the land. But everybody over 20 years old, will die over the next 40 years. Actually, the language that is used in the Torah is they are going to drop dead over the 40 years of the desert. So it is a terribly low period in the history of the Jewish people, of the nation of Israel. It is a very sad occurrence because when the people hear this decree that God puts on them, they cry terribly. They remove all of their jewels and beauty. But nonetheless, it's what happens. So that entire episode, our tradition is that it occurs on the 9th of Av. So the creation of the 9th of Av is not the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. The creation of the 9th of Av is the report of the spies. When they come back to Moses and present this information to him and cause pandemonium and despair among the people and incur this decree of God that they should run through the desert for 40 years and die there for all intents and purposes. That means that the cause of Tisha B'Av is not the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, but the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash is a symptom of Tisha B'Av. Yes? It's the result of Tisha B'Av, not the inception or the impetus of Tisha B'Av. Now, on that, it's important to call our attention to a concept that I'm implying. And that is that further in our tradition, the commemoration, if you will, of Tisha B'Av is not so much a commemoration in the sense that it happened then and we mark it today. For us, the Tisha B'Av and all of the fast days that we fast, except for Yom Kippur and Ta'anit Esther, those are different, right? The 4 fast days that revolve around the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, which is the 10th of Tevet, the 17th of Tammuz, the 9th of Av, and Tzom Gedalia, which is day after Rosh Hashanah. Those 4 fasts, those are not commemorative. Those fasts are dealing with problems that have not gone away. Those fasts maintain and address fundamental core issues. Let's have a look, because it's not this what I'm saying to you, that it's not just commemorative, that it is addressing a perpetual issue on the anniversary of the source of these events is not just my suggestion. This too is presented by Harambam, by Maimonides. Let's have a look at that as well. Maimonides says over here, this is again in the laws of fasts in his book, the Mishneh Torah, the opening of the 5th chapter. He says, look, yesh sham yamim. In Hebrew, it literally means there is, or there are. Yesh sham, there are days. Shekol Yisrael mit'anim bahem. That all of Israel fasts during these days. And we do it mipeneh hatzarot sheru bahen, which up till here looks like it's commemorative. We do this because in our history, there were really bad things that happened on these days. And the reason why we do this, says the Rambam, says Maimonides, is kedei le'orer halevavot liftoach darkei teshubah. The reason why we stop eating is because it awakens our hearts. And by awakening our hearts, we open pathways to teshubah. It doesn't mean we return in teshubah. We do teshubah. It just says it opens the pathways. It opens pathways that otherwise are not open for us. And why is it that fasting does this? I'm adding this gloss in here because if you're not having lunch, you're always wondering why, right? We don't go very well without our meals. And so anytime that the Hachamim want us to remember something, they tell us not to eat. So they say, don't eat before you say Kiddush because we don't want you to forget to say Kiddush. Don't eat before you light the Hanukkah candles because we don't want you to forget to light the Hanukkah. Don't eat before you check for the Chametz because you write for it. Don't eat before you pray Mincha because, and so on and so forth, right? Because they know that if you're not going to eat, you're going to be asking, why are we not eating? And as long as they have that upon you, then you make sure that they remember, you'll remember. So when we have fast days, the fast days are not for suffering. The ta'anit, the word ta'anit literally means deprivation, right? Inui in Hebrew is deprivation. Deprive yourselves so that the awareness that you're deprived is what keeps your mind on something that you need to remember. That's why we fast. Now remember, we said that it sounds like it's commemorative because he says over here, we do this mipeneh hatzarot sheru bahem because of the bad things, the distressful things that occurred on those days. But now listen to what he says. This is remarkable. Pay close attention. He says it opens the pathways of Teshuvah, and therefore yiyeze zikaron lema'asenu hara'im. It will cause us to be aware of, to pay attention to, right? Zikaron over here, memory over here means to pay attention, to focus on. In the same way that in English, I would say to somebody, remember, I'm watching you, right? That's not recall, it's keeping your mind in the forefront. So it should be an awareness, a memory for our poor deeds, our problematic deeds, and the deeds of our fathers, our ancestors. This is the clincher. Look at these next words. Shehaya kema'asenu ata. That were just like the deeds we are doing today. So what essentially the Rambam is saying is that nothing's changed. We are still in the same behaviors. It may be that the mode of behavior is different, maybe that the fashion of behavior, but the impetus, the source, the drive of the behavior and mindset is the same across the generations. To the point that it caused them and us, otam hatzarot, these terrible distresses. So that, if you think about it, is a remarkable point of Maimonides, because what he's saying is, as I suggested at the beginning, these fasts are not commemorative solely. These fasts are opportunities for addressal of their original issues. So every day that we engage in, every year, that we engage in this annually, we are returning to the original issues that caused these days to manifest in the Jewish calendar at the very beginning. Yes? All right. Everyone with me? All right. So the big question then is, well, what was the problem? So you say, well, they came back with a bad report. That's true. They did come back with a bad report, but in order for us to be able to address that, as with all of our issues appropriately, we can either address symptoms or we can address causes. And addressing symptoms is good for a time, but addressing causes is what gets ultimately at the root of what it is that brings these issues out. And if we can get to the cause and address the cause, that is when healing happens. So that in and of itself, I want to pause before we go any further, because I want to call your attention to the fact that there is this beauty in the Jewish calendar. That if you live the Jewish calendar as part of your Jewish life, every mo'ed, right? A mo'ed is literally an appointment in time. It is a set place where we meet with God in time. So there is physical, there's spatial mo'ed, and there's temporal mo'ed, right? There is place that we call mo'ed, and there is time that we call mo'ed. So when we talk about space-time, the Torah always refers to space-time. So there is Ohel Mo'ed, right, which was the tent of meeting place between the people and God. And there are the Mo'adei Israel, or Ele Mo'adei Adonai Mikra'e Kodesh, the Mo'adim of Israel. They are appointments in time with God. And the beauty about our calendar with these appointments that we have is that if you pay attention to them, they address the most fundamental aspects of human experience. So Pesach is Zman Cherutenu. It's a time of freedom when we address what does freedom mean to us and how free am I in my life. Sukkot is Zman Simchatenu, the time of our happiness. What is happiness? How does it manifest in our life? Why am I sitting in a hut outside in the winter if this is about happiness? What does it tell me? As an aside to that, it would be, I always suggest on Sukkot that people read Freud's essay called On Transience, because there's this beautiful story that is told, right, as the source for that essay, in which Freud was walking with Rilke, the poet, in a beautiful meadow in the spring. And he turns to Rilke and he sees that he's crying. And he asks him, why are you crying? And Rilke says, because I'm looking at all of this beauty and it's all going to die. And Freud ends up writing an essay on that problem, because you'd think, Freud, pull yourself together, Rilke. I mean, these things die every year. They're going to come back next spring. What's your problem? But he realized that Rilke was pointing out a fundamental issue with the human experience and condition of the nature of reality. Everything dies. All things that are precious to us, all things that we love, die. And Freud took that very seriously. If Rilke was crying over flowers that were going to die in a meadow, that wasn't some small thing. And Freud wrote an entire essay on transience. And he said, is it not true that its very preciousness is in the fact that it does die? Because if it went on forever, it wouldn't be precious to us. I mean, that's the summation of his essay. I suggest you read it. I ask people to read that on Sukkot because that's what Sukkot is. Sukkot is a celebration of transience, and in the celebration of transience, we celebrate our preciousness and the joy of our lives. Those are just examples of every appointment in time that we have in the Jewish calendar that addresses something core and fundamental in our lives, and even, my friends, the fast days. And what the fast days prompt us to look at is, if there are problems in your life, address the causes, not the symptoms only. You may have to address the symptoms, but never mistake the addressal of symptoms for healing. Always ask, why is this happening? And so when we go back to the desert and the report of the spies, we can say, well, what are we going to do here? What does God do? He says, look, the people who came back with the report, they're going to die, a year for a day, Yom Lashana, 40 years are going to go, one for every day that they spend spying out horribly that land. But why did they do it? What was their tactic? How did they create the pandemonium that ensued as a result of their return and their report? What was the problem? And that is what I really want to spend the rest of the time thinking about with you, because it's there where the chinam comes in. So this Hebrew word chinam, Literally, I mean, in modern Hebrew, you go to Israel and you tell somebody Zechinam, it means it's free. You don't have to pay for it. Yeah. And that's what it means in the Torah as well. It means that it's not, what does it mean that you don't have to pay for it or that it's free? It means that it has no value because it doesn't require an exchange of value, right? In other words, if it was something of value, I would require an exchange of its value in order to be able to present you with this valuable thing. But when I get something for free, I don't have to exchange the value. And because I don't have to recognize its value, I don't necessarily see it as having value. That's what chinam means. So that's the first point. It's very important. It's a basic point, which we all recognize. We don't always think about it consciously. We just say, oh, it's free, and we take it. But we also understand why we want our children to earn things and not just be given things, because we want them to be able to have a sense of value, we always say. Well, how is that going to give them a sense? Because they realize that if they have to exchange something valuable, even if it's their own time, and by the way, what is more valuable than time? The most precious gift we can ever give each other is our attention and our time. So it is definitely an exchange of value, question of what value it has. And we want our children to be able to learn to exchange value for value so that they see a world of value. Because somehow we believe that this is better than seeing a world of no value. The question is, once we establish that, what makes something valuable? Wherein does value lie? And what I will suggest in the most basic way is that nothing in this world has inherent value. All value depends on something's relationship with other things. Another way of saying that is all value depends on context. Within which context and therefore in which way does this particular detail relate to the other details in the particular format in which it finds itself? So a very basic example of this, you take a dollar, a pound, euro, whatever it is, and you take something which has clear value, I mean, right, whatever the value may be, even the value of the euro or the pound or the dollar will be relative to the marketplace, even in its own country, isn't that right? What is the power, the buying power of this particular unit of value? Will have everything to do with the contextual situation in which it exists. So if Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, gets up on the wrong side of the bed one day, everybody's dollars are all off kilter. It's astonishing that it could be that sensitive, but I'm not far off as far as that's concerned. And we all know it. And now if I take my pound, my British pound, which is a big issue, right? I mean, how come we're not using euros? And I don't want to get into any sensitive questions and discussions. I'm an American, I'm just saying, I'm an American. But I love the UK. So if I take my British pound and I travel into the EU and I want to use it as is, good luck. Maybe I'll find somebody off a dark alley somewhere that doesn't mind to take it from me and will find a way to be able. But either way, no matter what, I will need to exchange it for someone who recognizes its potential value in a foreign context and replace it with a value that is recognized in this current context, because they hope that they will somehow be able to reach that context that the pound came from and exchange it again. Isn't that right? It all depends on context. Everything that connects to value depends on context. There is no such thing as inherent value in constituent parts. Now, another word that we use for value also, depending on its context, is meaning. What something means. What something means is essentially its value. And what something means always and only depends on its context. So, for example, I bring flowers to my wife. Well, how does she respond to flowers? Well, if I were to tell you, how do you think my wife responds to flowers? You probably, if you were in any way familiar with such an interaction, would ask me a few more questions. Well, why did you bring her flowers? What day was it? Did you bring her flowers as a result of forgetting your anniversary the day before? Do you bring her flowers every day? Are these flowers that she likes? Yes, you see what I'm doing here, right? I'm taking an action that sounds nice. But the reality is that action has no value outside of the context in which it's performed. So when I hear as the nation of Israel that this land that I'm supposed to come into is mine and it belongs to me, what is going to be the nature? I mean, that's a lovely idea. But what is going to be the nature of life there? What will I need to give up in order to be able to live there? What will be the nature of my life when I am there? All of that is a question of meaning, of value, and then ultimately of context. So recognize that the context of this land had been provided by God to Abraham. He says, Abraham, let me tell you about this land, right? And what does God do in terms of telling Abraham about this land? He contextualizes the land. Otherwise, it's a strip of land, like any other strip of land anywhere else. Which is something that was easy to say. We could always deconstruct things, yeah? So what does God do with this? He builds, he goes, look, first of all, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. But more than that, there's this one line in the Torah, which is, it says, the eyes of the Lord your God are upon this land from the beginning of the year to the end. It's a land that is watched by the good Lord. It is a land that belongs to you. It is a land that is unique for you. All of these things are contextualizations of what otherwise would be another piece of land on this planet. And the people that are about to walk into this land and take it don't necessarily see the context within which God is speaking from. They came from a land that was the only land they knew. Egypt seemed a lot better to them, even though they were slaves there. They didn't know how to be free. This was a land that was set up for a sovereign people. And it was being presented to a nation of slaves that could not shed their slavery, no matter how much they tried. So look at the language. I want to look at the language with you and how it is that they return, because it's very telling. Look what they do. They come back and they say, Vaisapirulo. They said to Moses, Vayomeru, and told, Banu ela aretz. We came to the land. These are the spies talking, right? We came to the land, Asher shelachtanu, that you sent us to. And indeed, Gam zavat halav udvashi v'zeh priya. Oh, it's absolutely a land flowing with milk and honey, like you said. As a matter of fact, here's the fruit. Look at this beautiful fruit. Look at the next word, Ephes. You know what Ephes means in Hebrew? Ephes, zero. You know what this means, this flowing with milk and honey, this wonderful produce? You know how valuable that is? You know what kind of meaning that has to us? Zero. Everything that you were told by God, everything that was mentioned to you about these beautiful elements, these valuable elements of the land, all of it, zero. No value whatsoever. Ki azam, the nation that's there, they're far too powerful, that live in that land, the Yoshev Ba'aretz. He'arim, the cities, betzurot gdolot meod, They are tremendously fortified. Yelidei ha'anak reinu sham, we saw giants there. They go on and on and on and on and on and on. But look what they do. Notice the mechanics, the tactics. They have something that is being held of a certain value, and they reduce it completely to nothing. By what? Reframing the entire context. You think this is a beautiful land flowing with milk and honey. That's the context. A beautiful place for sovereignty. We're going to recontextualize the whole thing and reframe it for you and say that everything that you just heard in one context, ephes, it's all zero, no value. Why? Because the broader context is the people are too powerful, the cities are too fortified, there are giants living there. They go on to say we lookers in their eyes, we're like insects to them. They will completely annihilate us. Well, that makes everything sound a little different, doesn't it? The problem with the report of the spies was the fact that they completely rejected the context in which the land was presented to them, which was very much a nature of their own identity. I mean, God is saying, this is where you belong. This is what is yours. And instead, in order to be able to gain their power back or to gain the leverage back, what they do, they don't lie. These are not lies in the classic sense of the word. These are just repainted, reframed. It's kind of like modern news. I mean, it's kind of hard to argue with the photographs and the video footage that we're presented with. The bigger problem is not the footage. It's not the photographs. The bigger problem is, what is the context within which this photograph was taken? What is the context within which this video footage was recorded? Because it's in that the meaning lies. And of course, anytime that I remove a detail from its inherent or native context, I can always put some new context around it and redefine it utterly. Isn't that right? And if you question this at all, consider when in your life your words have been taken out of context. I mean, good luck trying to fix that. Because somebody will say to you, well, did you not say this? Well, no, I did say this, but I didn't mean, oh, well, I mean, you didn't mean, but you said it. I said it, but that's not what I meant, but okay, but you said it. All right, good. Well, okay, good luck with that. It is one of the most difficult things to address. And when you think about it, we realize that all of the discussions in politics, in religion, in social circumstances is never about the facts, because the facts don't matter. And that's really true. I mean, it's really true that the facts don't matter. The only thing that matters is what is the context within which the facts live. Not what are you saying, but who is saying it and why? And in what circumstance? Yes, that is always much more important than what is being said. It's one of the reasons why, I mean, I'm an educator. I was as Sarah mentioned to you earlier, I was a head of school. I was a headmaster of a Jewish day school in New York. And I always used to quote to the teachers a line from Margaret Mead, who was a great educator, American educator. And she said, teach children how to think, not what to think. Because when you teach children how to think, you give them contextual principles. No matter what it is that they learn, they will have the principles within which to be able to address them. But if you tell them what to think, all they've got is what you've taught them. It's a similar teach a man to fish thing, So if we think about the suggestions that I'm offering to you regarding Tisha B'Av and its origins, the problem of Tisha B'Av is a crisis in value and meaning. The problem of Tisha B'Av is that it can happen in this world, that we can live a life of chinam, which means that we can live in a situation or in a life in which the details are divorced, they're removed from their inherent or native context, and therefore they are devoid of their meaning. Because as we've recognized, nothing, not even the mitzvot themselves, have inherent meaning. Isn't it true that even a mitzvah, in order to be a mitzvah, needs to be performed within the context that it was commanded in? Because if I just keep Shabbat on a Wednesday, it's not Shabbat. And so the meaning of my Torah, the meaning of my life, the meaning of my actions, the meaning of my deeds, all depends on within which context am I doing them, thinking them, acting them, performing them, and so on. So Tisha B'Av is always, anytime that it manifests, addressing a cause, which is the breakdown of context and therefore value. And where I live in a world, for all intents and purposes, of randomness. Now, the amazing thing is that if we think about it, our world is more that way today than ever before. Because everything has been taken by the people. And I'm not saying this is a bad or good thing. I'm just observing that this is the situation. No longer do I have to rely on big companies in order to be able to serve my needs in life. Everything needs to be able to cater to my perspective, my life, my comforts, my way of doing things, which, again, I'm not saying is good or bad. I don't want you to hear that I'm berating something. I'm simply saying that this is the way that it is. I mean, I'm sure that many of you remember when things were on television, there were programs on television that you actually had to watch at the time that they were broadcast. Do you remember that? It's a long time ago, but it used to happen. That something would be on television at a particular time. And I'm talking about even before recordings, right? Before, you had the ability to record it. And, you either were there or you weren't. They used to call it prime time, Now they call it on demand. Why? Because nobody really wants to watch it when you show it to me. Maybe I'm busy. And the chances are a great more of you, right? A larger number of people will actually listen to this very lecture in an on-demand way. So God bless you for being here at this point in this time when we're actually putting it out tonight. It's not a small thing. It's not a small thing. I'm deeply grateful for that. I could be speaking, to Sarah only. Thank you, Sarah, for getting the troops, together tonight. So this is the point. Tisha B'Av is a time not where the problem is not any particular action, but rather where the problem is the possibility of stripping away the value of things by destroying their context. So you will recognize, I'm sure you will have heard at some point in your Jewish lives, that the reason why the Bet HaMikdash, the second one anyway, was destroyed was because of what we call Sinat Chinam. Have you heard this? Yes? A nod? Right. Sinat Chinam, which means valueless hatred, right? Or hatred that has no meaning, right? It's just random hatred with no real purpose or value. And most people think that the problem is the hatred in those two words. And what I am suggesting to you is not that the hatred is the problem, because there are times where, unfortunately, we also have to hate things or reject things, not love things. The problem was that it was chinam, that it had no value, no meaning. Have a look, as a matter of fact, because it's astonishing the way that the Hachamim put it. They ask, why was the second, this is in Masechet Yoman, the Talmud. They ask, why was the second Bet HaMikdash destroyed? After all, we do know that they were doing good things. They were oskim b'Torah. They were engaged in Torah. They were doing mitzvot. They did gemilut hasadim. They were doing acts of kindness. These look like they're good things. Why then was it harav? Why did the temple, why was it destroyed? And the answer is simply mipnei she'ayta bo sinat chinam, because in that time there was chinam hatred. And again, I'm saying most people will read this and think, well, this was the problem, the sinah. And what I'm suggesting is, no, this was the problem, the chinam. And that meant that if chinam was running things, all of these things, the Torah, the mitzvot, the Gemilut Chasadim, were also chinam. And so was the hatred, which made things terribly destructive. Because it's one thing if you're studying Torah and you're doing good deeds outside of the right context, right? You've lost your way in it. You don't really understand what it means to be the nation of Israel, sovereign and engaging in these things, which is important. Because as I said, you could give flowers, but it all depends on, well, what day is it? And why? And to whom? And that's exactly the same question that you could ask on any performance of a mitzvah, any kindness that a person does. I mean, have you ever heard of the term killing with kindness? It's an interesting English term. If you haven't heard of that, think about our prayers. The word chesed. If I were to ask you, is that a good word or a bad word? Is chesed a good thing or a bad thing? I would suggest, I would assume most people would say, yeah, chesed is one of the good things, right? So then why in our prayers every single day, and if we're careful 3 times a day, do we say about God that he's gomel hasadim, what's the next word? Tovim. What other kind of hasadim are there? Gomel hasadim what? Brahim? Well, no, there are hasadim that are not so good. Because it is possible, isn't it, to give things to people and take from them while you're giving to them. In other words, it's possible by giving things to people that you rob them of their own individuality, of their own autonomy. Is it not true that one has to think very carefully before one gives something to someone just because they think it's good? Do we not have to consider what it is that giving this to this person will do to this person? There's good chesed and there's not good chesed. And God is always gomel hasadim tovim. As a matter of fact, it's one of the reasons why whenever we talk about chesed, we all talk about gamal chesed. We don't say very often oseh chesed, that you do the chesed. Why? Well, what's a gamal? It's a camel. That's why we call them camels. The word gamal came first. And what's special about camels? Camels are these remarkable beasts that have the ability to traverse massive expanses of desert without water for days on end. They have everything that they need on their backs. The camel is the symbol for self-sufficiency, for autonomy. And so when we say we are going to engage in chesed, always be gomel chesed. Do chesed in a way that helps a person stand on their own 2 feet, not a chesed that makes them dependent. And that very simple idea in our Torah is one of the sources of a major question in society. How should the state support its citizens? Is giving always good? Yeah, well, just something to consider, but again, context. Acts alone never have inherent value. So what the Gemara is saying over here is, you want to know what the big problem was in the second Beit HaMikdash? Chinam was the big problem. Everything was removed from its context. Nothing had a clear nature of value, and therefore everybody was doing whatever it was that they wanted as they saw it fit. And therefore all the Torah and all the mitzvah and all the Gemilut Chasadim wasn't functioning in any way that was beyond a self-serving activity. I'm going to stop. I want to come back to you here and speak to you directly here, because this is really the crux of the matter as we close. It is never about what you're doing. It is always about how and why you are doing. It is absolutely possible for a person to study Torah, teach Torah, live Torah for selfish reasons. for self-serving reasons. And one is absolutely able to raise the flag of Torah itself for one's own personal purposes. And therefore, it is never, ever worthwhile to say, what does this person know? How much have they learned? But rather, why have they learned? What are they doing with what they know? In what framework are they using what it is that they know? It is never valuable simply to say, do a mitzvah. I hear people say that very often, do another mitzvah, take on another mitzvah. Poor advice. Why? Because if the context in which I am performing my mitzvot is not a good context, adding another mitzvah is not going to help me. Rather, what I usually say to people is, learn something more. Broaden your knowledge. Because the broader our knowledge and the more that we learn, the better our context and the more meaning we have to what it is that we do. Is it not true that as you learn more, grow more, mature more in your life, that the things that you do suddenly take on different meaning? Is it not true that once we become aware of the nature of our lives, where it is that we want to be in our lives, that we will readdress our actions, maybe do them differently, maybe stop doing them, maybe continue to do them, maybe do new things, but always should come from the question of, in which space do I wish to live in my life? What is the meaning? What is my purpose? Those words are not details. Those words are, what is the framework in which I live? Why do I get up out of bed in the morning? On Tisha B'Av, we strip away our comforts so that we can get down to the nitty-gritty points of life, to the core elements. So the Hachamim say to us, don't eat, don't drink, don't cushion your feet so that you don't feel the floor, don't engage in marital relations, don't anoint your skin, sit on the floor, be at the core of your existence and question, why am I not a sovereign people anymore? What is missing in the wholeness of my identity? Is it deed? Is it action? Am I not doing enough? Am I not acting enough? Or is there something about how it is that I see myself in this world that needs to change? What it means to be me in this world? What does it mean to me to be Jewish? That is not an action question. It is a meaning question, which means it's a value question, which has everything to do with the context of my life. In which context am I living? What is the overarching framework within which I run my days? What does it mean to me? To establish this in a more firm way, I'm going to close with the Maimonides as I opened with Maimonides, with an astonishing point he makes about action as opposed to purpose. And then we'll open for questions. Well, have a look at this very interesting point that Maimonides makes, that the Rambam makes. Here he's talking about Teshuvah. Sorry, here. This is the 7th chapter of the laws of Teshuvah in the Mishneh Torah. Teshuvah, this concept of return, right, is a return to a place. It's return to a mindset. It's return to a way of living. Now, many people, right, they focus their Teshuvah as well on deeds. They think, okay, if I do more or I do better, that's Teshuvah. Listen very carefully to this thing that the Rambam says. He opens saying, Kama me'ula ma'alata teshubah. He says, how high and lofty is the level that we call teshubah, which literally means return, right? You've come back to God. You've come back to yourself. You are now home in this space. Well, Emesh, just yesterday, Hayaze muvdal me'adonai Elohei Yisrael. I mean, yesterday, this person was separated from the God of Israel. As it says in Isaiah, "Avonotechem hayu mabdilim benechem leben Elohechem." Your sins were separating you from your God and you. Now, what does it mean to sin here? This is the most astonishing thing. Pay close attention. Yesterday, when a person was separated from God because they weren't in the space of Teshuvah, they would call out to him, pray to him. No answer. Oseh mitzvot, they would do mitzvot. But they would be ripped up in his face. As it says, Mi bikesh zot miyadchem ramos hatzerai, who asked you to trample my courtyards with your mitzvot. So notice that Maimonides does not say, what did it look like to be separated from God? Yesterday, this person was not praying to God. He was committing sins. Doesn't say that. He says he was praying and doing mitzvot, except that the prayers weren't heard and the mitzvot were ripped up. Today, he says, V'hayom, once a person has come into the place of Teshuvah, Humudbak b'shchina. Well, here his new context is being connected to the presence of God. As it says, you're connected to the Lord. Tzorek, he prays, v'ner namiyad, he's immediately answered. Oseh mitzvot, he does the mitzvot, mekablin otam benachat, and they're accepted calmly with happiness, b'simcha. This is astonishing. He's saying the same. He says the only thing that has changed before Teshuvah and after Teshuvah is Teshuvah. Meaning the space in which one is now living one's life has changed. The deeds are the same. Praying, mitzvot happen then and they happen now. Except then the response was rejection and here the response is embrace. It doesn't say yesterday he was doing terrible things and today he's doing nice things. It says yesterday he was doing the exact same thing he's doing today, except that he brought flowers yesterday and he brought flowers today. Yesterday he brought flowers and he wasn't paying attention, didn't look her in the eye, got her the wrong flower. She hates yellow. All he brought was a big bouquet of yellow flowers. And today he brought and smiled to her, looked her in the eye, presented her with flowers that she liked, and so on. Tisha B'Av is pause, cut away the comforts that distract us from all of the things that are going on at our core. Consider your life as it is, not the trappings, your life as it is. Is your purpose being met? Are you satisfied and happy with your purpose? What does it mean to you to be you? What is the value of your being? It doesn't mean necessarily having to change your actions, although you may choose to when you reconsider your purpose and the meaning of your being. But when you do change your purpose and the meaning of your being, or adjust it, or come back to it, which is what Teshuvah literally means, you return to. Rav Kook says beautifully that the first step of Teshuvah is coming back to oneself, living in integrity with one's genuine self. Well, that redefines whatever it is that we're doing. And that really is the purpose of Tisha B'Av. To take a situation that is stripped of value because it is stripped of context and therefore meaning, and to reconnect to what it is to be Israel in this world, to be the people that we are in this world, to embrace it, to own it, to hold it close, and to live it as much as we can, and to recognize what it means to lack our sovereignty in its fullness, to not have, even though we may be back in our land again, the strife that we experience, the difficulties that we have, and being able to own exactly who it is that we are. And so with every year, it is also an appointment in time. It's a moed for addressing what it is that we don't yet have and what we might need in order to be able to hold a new context of life that redefines fully who it is that we are. I thank you so much for your attention and for your presence in this special appointed time that we had to be able to meet together. And I'm very happy if there's any questions that anyone has to answer.
Yes, thank you very much, Rabbi Dweck, for the thoughtful words. If anyone has a question, just unmute yourself and or type it in the chat if you want me to pose a question. Anyone, feel free to start.
So maybe I'll start. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed. Actually, I have two questions, but I'll start with one, and then let's see how this develops. So you discussed about the action of the Metaglim, but nothing about their motivation.
Yes.
Of this FS. And I don't know, maybe you can elaborate a bit on that.
That's an excellent question. Thank you for that question. I mean, the truth is it requires another shiur, but it's important to recognize that what they say when they come back with the report is, we looked like insects in their eyes. And that meant that there were two major things that were running in them: fear and shame. Fear because they felt that they would be destroyed, and shame because they genuinely did see themselves as insects in the face of giants. They didn't feel that they had any value or measure in front of these people. And so their motivation was to reject this opportunity of freedom because they were afraid of freedom. And that is a reality, right? We don't hold to freedom as easily and openly as we think. We like liberties, we like being able to do what we want, but to be able to own the full responsibility of our own lives is a daunting concept or possibility. So they saw that staring them in the face. And the easy and safe thing to do was to run back into slavery, into the hands of Egypt. And so they manipulated it that way and that's what it is. They manipulated the way that everybody related to it so that they wouldn't bring themselves into that space.
So could it be, when you were talking about that, I also thought, could it be that one of the problems was that it was for them for free, so that they, I don't know, it's just a thought that I have, that because what you say, if you receive something for free, it basically has no value, and then maybe they had to go through these 40 years of suffering in terms of earning.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that that's incorrect. To say that they went into it for free, I mean, the reality is that they spent years and years in slavery in order to be able to ultimately achieve this. But you are correct in saying that they were not able to see that. They were not able to experience it that way. So they did need to go through a whole boot camp and training process in order to be able to ultimately come into it. And yes, that's what was required. So it's a wonderful insight. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else with a question? Or
I have a question. I was wondering if you talk about Tisha B'Av, and I think it's very beautiful to saying that it's a time to reflect and to really look at your life and everything. But how do you then distinguish it between the period of the Yamim Noraim and Yom Kippur? Like, what's the big difference? And especially since they're so shortly after each other.
Oh, that's an excellent question. And they come when they do on purpose, right? Tisha B'Av, for all intents and purposes, is a preparation for the Yamim Noraim. Because what happens on Tisha B'Av, really, if we talk about the time, right? The proper term for the Moed of Tisha B'Av, if Pesach is a time of freedom, Sukkot is a time of happiness, what kind of time is Tisha B'Av? It's a time of mourning. So the first step towards the Chagim, if we look at it from this context, because it always depends where in the year you pick up the pattern, right? Tisha B'Av is a time of mourning, which essentially means, can I see what is actually happening in my life? Before I address what do I want to do with my life, which is essentially Elul and Rosh Hashanah, before I address, wait a minute, I do want to take inventory of my life. I do want to do something about my life. Before I even do that, I need to pause and can you see what your life is right now in the context of what it once was or what it could be? Can you just see that? And in order to see that, you have to strip everything away and sit on the floor and just be. And that's, interestingly, one of the hardest things for us to do, especially coming out of lockdown. We all know, I mean, everybody's had to be on one level or another in their own company without all of the things that distract us. Yeah, it wasn't the easiest thing for many people. So what Tisha B'Av does is that one day a year, it's stop, take it all away, sit outside of comforts and distractions, and just be. And avilut literally means not just mourning what was lost. The word aval in Hebrew literally means surely. So the old use of the word is it's absolute. So for example, the brothers of Yosef, when they realize that everything is coming down around them, he's put them through this whole thing when they come back to Egypt and all of that. And they're waiting in the waiting room to see the viceroy, which is Yosef. They don't realize that, who's basically, he's accusing them of stealing the money and being spies and whatever it is. They say to each other, Aval Ashemim Anachnu, which means we are surely guilty, Alachenu, over our brother, for what we did to him. They come to the reality, the terms of the reality of the fact that they have guilt because of what they did to Yosef when they didn't think they were then. And that's why in modern Hebrew, the word aval means however, right? Or but. Yeah, you could do this in this aval. Why? Because aval or however is always, you can talk about whatever reality you want, but there's always something else that you have to deal with that is going to affect this if you don't pay attention. So the reason why it's used in avilut is because something's changed in life. Circumstances have shifted. And the process of avilut is to come to terms with what the new reality is. Yes, does that make sense? And so Tisha B'Av is a time of, can you sit and see in real terms what is and what isn't in your life right now? If you can do that, you can come to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and have meaning in it, right? Yeah.
If I may have also a question, maybe the form of Tisha B'Av doesn't really support the Avilut part. It is what in our community we do. So the Echa and all the Piyutim we say.
Mm-hmm.
Why is the form like that? I mean, even if of the purpose, I mean, it's what you said is that we should look for purpose and the meaning and what is the thought and everything. Mm-hmm. But then there is the whole form. So you don't eat, you don't do that.
So I spoke about the, sorry if I'm interrupting.
Yeah, that's the question. I mean, why is for me, the question is, why is the form of it, which is very special, they tefillin only in the afternoon, we don't do it in the morning.
It's a really, really also phenomenal questions. Thank you for the questions. Every single moed has what we call its avodah, right? There's the service that we do in the moed, and always the service is supposed to serve the nature of the moed, right? So what we do on Pesach is supposed to enhance and teach and help freedom. What we do on Sukkot is supposed to do that, right? Sometimes we don't get how it does that, but it's what's meant to do. So your question is important because what we do essentially, I mentioned about the stripping away of the comforts, right? Because it takes away our distractions and any other things that may be, where we may extrapolate our life or value onto them, rather than being able to look at me as I am. So that's that. The reading of Echa is important because we are using the eloquence of the prophet Jeremiah, in recognizing what was lost with the loss of our national sovereignty. Yes, so we use his words to do it because he usually does it better than we do, right? I mean, we could try. And we do. When you think about they're not piyutim, they're kinot. But if you think about the kinot are our additions to that, right? What have we lost? What do we not have anymore? What is missing for us in our life? And does it matter to us? Because that's really the question. It's not about just saying, okay, we don't have this anymore, because if nobody cares about the Beit HaMikdash or Jerusalem or our national sovereignty, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. You can read it every day, but if the question is, what does it mean to you? So what we read in Echa is not just the fact that we lost these things, but we hear in Yirmiyah what it means to him. And we try to hear him because he was a leader amongst our people. He was a visionary amongst our people. And maybe he's going to give us some insight, because if he's crying like that and he's talking about it like that, does that speak to me? Does it mean something to me? And if my forebears, my ancestors wrote these dirges, right, which are kinot, they're poems, but they're sad, lamenting poems. Why did they feel that it was important to write that? What were they missing? What did it mean to them? And when I look at what it meant to them, I get a better sense of what it might mean to me. It's possible that I come out of Tisha B'Av saying, you know something, I felt absolutely nothing and I'd like to go on with my life. Well, okay, so then that's what you got out of Tisha B'Av. At least be honest if that's what it is that one came out. But it's possible that if one does the day as the day is meant to be done, that insights come in that you wouldn't otherwise anticipate, that helps one think about, realize more. What does it mean to be who I am in this world as a Jew, part of the nation of Israel? All right.
Thank you. Maybe one last question.
One more, yeah, and then I have a lecture at 8:30 that I'm going to have with my 8:30 or 9:30. So, yeah.
May I ask one question?
Please.
First of all, thank you very much for an excellent shiur.
Pleasure.
My question is looking into the future, knowing from the past that the Dor who saw Matan Har Sinai came out of Egypt, all these miracles, had such difficulties to go and believe in, to get into the free land as God has given it to us. How will we, our Dor, or Im Yirtzeh Hashem, if Mashiach comes tomorrow, ever be prepared and get in with all the miracles that we see today in the modern world to believe he's here and we're going to go there?
These are such great questions. Really, thank you so much for these questions. So I would ask you to consider this, right? It is true, right, that this generation, what we call the Dor De'am, right? These are great, we assumed that they were wonderful. And they were. I mean, they saw great miracles. But it's important to recognize that as great the miracles were, and as great as they were for all intents and purposes, a very, very young nation. They were infants, yeah? The coming out of Egypt was like a delivery from the womb. So what you do for little children is you tell them stories, you do tricks for them, right? These exciting things for them. And that works for them because they are in a place where this is what they need in order to be able to understand these ideas. We're 3,000 years old now. We've been through everything. We have seen everything. There's not a place on this planet that we have not lived. There's not a language that we haven't spoken. There's not a philosophical, sociological concept that we have not imbibed into our own people. We are old and we are mature. And we understand the world in a way that they just could not in that time. And that's why, it's one of the reasons why many of the Hachamim, and I think that this is, for me personally, one of the most accurate assessments, why this last exile, this last galut is so long. Because it takes a long time to be able to accept, this is a key, to accept life and the world on its own terms. And if we're going to connect to God, we need to accept his world as he presents it to us. Life as he presents it to us, not as we will have it, not as we want it, but as it is. And that's why Tisha B'Av, like I was saying before, is very much a day that just looks at the world, the life that we have as it is. Now, once we do that, we can then think about what do we want to change. But until we're able to see it in its own terms, as it is, without the magic tricks, without the miracles, without any of that, not because I'm doing miracles for you, you keep Torah, because the Torah is you. A mitzvah is part of your identity. The nature of your humanity is endemic and fundamental to what it is that you are. Do you know what it means to be human? And the truth of the matter is we're coming out today with full depth of what it means to have a human psyche and a human condition in ways that we never did before. That's really the reality. It's taken us centuries to be able to come to an awareness of the nature of reality on levels that we never could have anticipated or even begun to understand. We couldn't even get out of slavery at that time. Forget about, we couldn't even be free people. Forget about the sophisticated and subtle aspects and complexities of the human condition. And on that, what it means to be Israel, you know, one Jew, three opinions. It's not, I mean, it's complex enough in itself. So it's taken us time to mature. We're 3,000 years old. What's your first name? Your first name is Danny Yitzchak. I see Danny Yitzchak.
Yitzchak.
You're Yitzchak, and that's, yeah. So Rabbi Yitzchak, it's taken us 3,000 years. And what Tisha B'Av is a time to say, can you just see what is there? Without your projections, without what you want to do with it, without how you could make it better. What's there? Be here now. That's the inyan of it. And so, yes, as we go through the eons of life, I mean, we're pretty crazy people. We're the only ones that have been around for that long. You know, you walk into the British Museum over here, and every room that you walk into is an exhibit of people that are footnotes to your history. You should be an exhibit with me over there. But instead, we have our water bottle and we're walking around like this is a normal thing, like it's not a big deal. Yeah, it's so cute. Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia. It's not. So it requires a level of depth, maturity, accepting of the world on its own terms that simply was not even possible at that time. And now it can be. Now, maybe in 100 years, I don't know. You know, right? But ultimately, we're working towards it. The last thing that I'll say to that is the world is getting better and it is moving towards that. It doesn't always look like it. It looks like the world's in a mess. But if I were to ask you, you know something, Yitzchak, I'm going to transplant you to 20 years ago, not to visit. You get to stay there. Would you take me up on that? Well, you probably have to think, right. So, no bidyuk, right? So ultimately, we're getting there. And so we're getting to a maturity, a sophistication, a depth, a breadth that through time we become ready to be able to do those things.
Ani mamin.
Gamani, ashrecha. Okay, good night. Thank you
Thank
so
you
very
much. We're right back for the lecture. To all of the others, thanks for attending.
I look forward to being able to see you, hopefully in times coming, in person. We'll be able to spend together. Good night.
Thank you very much.